All right, it's lesson 5. It's Camera Raw Beyond Basics and with the adjustment tools. So if you download the files that are listed in the lesson 5 assignment in the module, the very first line says batch toning, and the next one says download your images here. If you download your images and expand them, you'll get images, and then open them in Bridge, you'll get them. You'll get all these images. Now there's a lot of images in there. They're listed 1 through 16, but there's multiple ones. Like one has like 5 images. So the great thing about Camera Raw is when you shoot a number of photographs that are very similar settings, you can edit all of them at one time. It's a perfect example is like Friday Night Football. I shot this last fall, and all the images are very similar because they're under similar light situations, so I can batch tone them. So we're going to open the whole 1 series, so 1_ edit multi 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So just simply click on the first one, hit shift, and click on the 5th one. And these are DNGs, so they're raw files. So if you right click and open with Camera Raw, they should open right up in Camera Raw. So I just wanted to change the view to match the view used in the example. So you'll notice that the 5 photos are thumbnails are on the bottom. If you click through, you can see the differences between all the images. So I'm just going to go back to the very first one. So there are 2 methods in batch toning. This is the preferred method. So once the images are in Camera Raw, you'll see the film strip on the bottom, or in some cases if you have it set on the side. So click on one of the photos that you'd like to tone. We'll use this one as an example, and then I'm going to adjust the toning. So I'm going to add a little bit of exposure. I'll add a little bit of contrast. Then I'm going to knock the whites down just a hair. And I'm going to add a little bit of texture, a little bit of clarity, a little bit of vibrance, a little bit of saturation. So that looks good for me. I like the way it looks. So then just hit the Shift key and click on the thumbnails that you wish to tone. Then go to the original one and see the 3 little dots. Click on it, go down to Sync Settings. So this dialog box will open, and you can select or deselect any of the settings you want to sync across all the images. By default, this is what will be selected. A lot of the ones that are not selected are usually specific to different toning, so I would probably leave most all of them at the default. And then just simply hit OK. And it'll tone across all the photos. You notice they'll change. So now if you look at this one, this is the original, this is the new one. This is the new tone, and there's the original. Same with this one, original. And you could either go through all these and fine tune them. You get them close, and then you could fine tune them. Now let me show you the second way of doing it. So we're going to use we'll just tone these 4. So in this particular case, you click on the one you want and then Shift and click on the other ones, and notice that they're not showing up, but they are highlighted here. Then you can simply go in and adjust, and as you adjust, you'll notice all the thumbnails are adjusted as well. So as you go through, you can change however you want to change it. And as you change it, all of them are changed. Now, the reason why the first method is preferred is because if you're doing a large number of photos, like 50 or 60 or 70 or even more, as you change it, sometimes Camera Raw will delay as it's trying to change all the photos. So it's making adjustments every time you click on it. So if you just tone one of them and then sync it later on, it tends to be a little bit on the faster side. So that's the more preferred method. So just look at the images, admire them, and then go ahead and close them. So the next one I'm going to show you is clarity and texture tools. With the clarity and texture tools, it can bring out a lot of the details. So there are actually two cool tools that do similar things, clarity and texture. And clarity is stronger than texture, and that's a good thing. And the reason why that's good is sometimes you want a larger amount of detail brought up, where texture is a bit more subtle. Clarity brings out larger areas of tonality and changes the luminance and saturation as well. So you'll notice that the photo may get brighter or darker based on your clarity. Clarity and texture are fundamentally different tools, but they have their own strengths. Texture is best for making subtle adjustments to those mid-frequency tones or features, where clarity is best for making strong adjustments to a broader tonal range or frequency range. So in most photographs, you'll want texture and detail. But some of them you'll want to obscure. But we'll touch all on that later on. So step 1, open 2_clarity1.dng, which is this chair photo here. I'm going to double click on it, open it up, and it's in Camera Raw. Now I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to zoom it to 100%, and then I'm going to move so you can see a little bit more detail in the chairs, on 2 chairs, and I just use the space bar and it changes and you can slide it around. And using the texture control is really simple. Just slide the slider to the right to increase. So when texture, you'll see that the texture kind of it adds more texture. It just brings up a little bit of contrast in those mid ranges, and it's a very subtle tool. You can also notice that there's a little bit of clipping in the dark areas, but you could always go into the blacks and adjust that as well if you need to. I'm going to go back, and then clarity. So clarity, if you slide it to the right, it will brighten everything as well and then bring in the detail. So you'll see that everything is kind of tight. So this is a lot of brighter. So this is clarity, and this is texture. Notice the texture is just bringing out the texture, really not bringing up the brightness area. This is again clarity. It brings up the brightness as well. So any image where I want to emphasize texture and detail in the photo itself, I would add anywhere from 25 to 50 texture and clarity. So go ahead and put this at about 30 and this about 30 as well, and you can see the overall. So this is before and this is after. And if the black clipping bothers you, just simply slide the blacks over. So again, before, after. So again, look at the image, admire it, and then go ahead and close it. So open image 2clarity2.dng. You can go back to bridge, I'm going to open this one. So there are photographs where you don't want to emphasize texture and clarity, like images of women and children. In those cases, you don't want to apply positive clarity. However, you can use it to control and reverse clarity to soften the skin. This is called adding negative clarity, meaning you add less than 0 to reduce the middle contrast, making it more flat and giving it a softening effect. So move the slider to the left to about, on the texture slider to the left to about -20. And the clarity to about -25. So you'll notice that her details in her skin have softened. Again, if you look at it, here's the before and here's the after. It softens the texture and the clarity in her skin, so she looks a little bit softer. And you'll notice all the details and flaws in her skin are minimized, but at the cost of the detail in her hair. But I'll show you how to correct that in next week's lesson. So just go ahead and look at this image, admire it, and once you're done, just go ahead and close it. So the next tool we'll talk about is adjusting contrast using curves. So the contrast slider, which has gotten much better in Camera Raw, it'll only take you so far, but luckily there's curves. And this is a powerful tool to make your images look stunning. It's just another tool that has made its way from regular Photoshop into Camera Raw, and its ability to edit individual red, blue, and green colors with curves. So we're going to go ahead and open 3 curves 1.jpg in Camera Raw. Notice it's a JPEG, it's not a RAW file, but that's okay. Just right click, open Camera Raw, and this is the image. So go ahead and adjust it however you feel it needs it in the basic. So I'm just going to add a little bit of exposure, maybe a little bit of contrast, and then once I'm done, I'm going to go under curve, which is the second here. By default, the curve panel will have parametric curves open first. So if not, go ahead and select it. That's this one right here. So above the histogram here, there are 5 icons. The very first one is the parametric curve. The next one is point curve. The next one is red, green, and blue curves. So go back to parametric, and you can adjust them up and down until you get a desired effect. If you click on it once, and then you can use the arrows up and down if you prefer to do it that way. So the highlight slider will adjust just the highlights area. And you can see it as it makes a curve difference. So right below that is the lights slider, which will cover the next range. It's kind of like the highlight, but a little bit lower. And the darks and shadows are pretty much the same thing, but on the lower, the mid-tone lowers and the dark lower areas. So if you look darks, it's a little bit lower, and shadows are even lower than that. You can also click and use the arrows to go up and down. Double click on sliders, it'll zero them all back out. So if you don't want to customize the curve and parametric curves, click on the next icon, which selects the point curve. This will change the controls under the histogram for several preset choices like linear control, medium contrast, strong contrast, and custom. Be careful when using point curve and parametric curve together because they build on one another. So if you make an adjustment in parametric curve and then click on point curve, it'll add all that all together. So here is the strong contrast, or medium contrast. Here's strong contrast, and here's custom. So if you go to strong contrast and then you start moving your curves, it's already automatically going to make it custom. So if you create a curve that you'd like to be able to apply to other photos, you can save the curve as a preset. To do that, click on the presets icon, which is second from the bottom in the tools along the sides. Right there is presets. And you can create a preset right there. I'm going to go back to this. So if all this is too much for you, there's another really cool tool called the Targeted Adjustment Tool, or TAT for short. It's located just above the histogram in the upper right corner. It has a tiny plus and a circle with a dot in it, and it's located right here. Just move the tool over to the part of the image. So if you click on it, you move it to a part of the image. You can go up or down. It will adjust that particular part of the image. Now, before we finish with curves, there's another feature in Camera Raw we'll look at. It's the ability to change curves in each color panel. So we're going to close this particular one. I'm just going to hit cancel, and we're going to open a 3_curves2.dng. So looking at this photograph, overall there's just too much blue. So click on the blue icon above the histogram, and you'll see that the histogram here turns to blue on one side and yellow on the other. You can get Camera Raw to tell you exactly what part of the image to adjust. Just move the cursor over the background you want to affect and press and hold the command key, or on a PC the control key. This will open an eyedropper, and once you click on the image, it adds that point to the curve that corresponds with the area that you want to adjust. You can simply then move the curve toward the yellow a little bit, and it will correct it. So just look at the image, admire it, and then go ahead and close it. So sharpening in Camera Raw. So if you shoot in JPEG, your digital camera automatically applies sharpening to the photo in the camera itself. So no sharpening is automatically applied by Camera Raw. But if you shoot in RAW format, you're telling the camera to ignore the sharpening, and that's why when you bring a raw image into Camera Raw, by default, it applies some sharpening called capture sharpening. So let's open image 4_sharpen1.dng. So when you open the raw image, by default it applies a small amount of sharpening to a photo. That just doesn't happen with JPEGs or TIFFs, only raw images. You can adjust this amount or turn it off altogether if you want by clicking on the Detail menu in the Edit panel. When you open the Detail panel, there are 3 sliders visible. Click on the little arrow next to the value above the sharpening slider. This will open the sharpening sliders and reveal 3 more sliders: radius, detail, and masking. Because sharpening is already up, the radius, detail, and masking. If you've been using Camera Raw for a while, you'll probably remember the older versions of Photoshop when you had to view your image at 100% to really see the effects of sharpening. This is no longer the case. The first slider, sharpening, dictates the amount of sharpening applied to the image. I set the amount to 110. The second slider, radius, determines how far out from the sharpening is applied from the edges of the image and parts in the photo that are being sharpened. The default is set to 1.0. Generally, you can use a lower radius than 1.0. The only time you'd need that value or higher is when the image is visibly blurry and has lots of details like this image, or the image needs some emergency sharpening. If you use too much, your photo can start to look fake or over-sharpened or even noisy. I kept the radius at 1.0 on this photo. The next slider down is the detail slider, which determines how much of the edge areas are affected by sharpening. You'll apply lower amounts of detail if your photo is slightly blurred, and higher amounts if you really want to bring out texture and detail. So how much you want to apply depends on the subject that you're sharpening. With an image like this with lots of metal and detail, it's an ideal candidate for a high amount of detail. Landscapes and cityscapes are good examples of photo that could use a lot of detail also. So drag this slider pretty far over. I felt about 60. Well, that's probably good. So looking at this image, here's before, here's after. Before, after. It's very subtle. So look at the image, admire it, and then close it. Although you don't see a lot of difference in sharpening, when you print the photo, it'll make a huge difference. It helps with the dot gain. So when an image is printed, what happens is the ink hits the medium, like the paper, and it tends to spread. And dot gain is the amount of spread that happens when it's drying and on the paper itself. So sharpening really helps with that. So even though you don't see a lot of difference in the sharpening, it's a really good idea to always sharpen. So look at the image, admire it, and then close it. So open the image 4_sharpen2.jpg in Camera Raw. And again, it's a JPEG, so you right click on it, open in Camera Raw. The last control in the sharpening panel is masking. And many times you want to sharpen only certain areas of your photograph while other areas you want to mask out and keep soft. What masking slider does is it reduces the amount of sharpening on non-edge areas. In other words, if it's a long continuous shade of color, it reduces the sharpening in that area. In this image, as you sharpen, her skin gets a lot of texture. As you slide this masking filter higher, you'll notice the skin texture goes away, but the detail along the edge of her shoulders and eyelashes remains sharp. So when you add sharpening, again, there's no option there because there's no sharpening added, but once you add sharpening, we'll go pretty extreme. You'll see the detail in her face here tends to stand out. So as you slide the masking area over, the detail lessens in this area, but it remains sharp along the eyelashes here and the hair. You can see here, less, there more. See the difference? I'm going pretty extreme just to show you, but And again, that this clipping in the white areas, you can easily change that in the edit panel. So if you press and hold the Option key or the Alt on the PC and click on any of the image sliders in the panel, you'll see the areas that are affected easily. So again, the Option keys for me is pressed, and you can click on any one of the details. It'll show you what's affected. In the masking, it's particularly helpful because you can see where here not a lot, everything's affected. Here a lot less is affected. So you can see here along the eyelashes and hair look really good, but the skin, there's not a lot of detail that's altered in the skin, hence the black. When masking is set to 0, everything turns solid white because the sharpening is being applied evenly to everything. So if you go to sharpening to 0, I'm hitting the Option key, everything's white. So it's applied everywhere evenly. But as you slide it, it shows you where the masking happens. This is perfect for sharpening women because it avoids sharpening their skin, but sharpens the things you want to keep sharp like eyes, eyebrows, lips, edge of the face, and so on. So look at the image, admire it, and then just close it when you're done. So next is adjusting or changing ranges of color. Sometimes you need to affect an entire area, like you need the entire sky blue, or the sand warmer, or a piece of clothing to be entirely a different color. In those cases, when you're adjusting large areas, it's usually quicker to use the HSL adjustments, which not only lets you change color, but it also lets you change the saturation and lightness of the color. So let's open image5_adjustcolor.dng. Right click, open in Camera Raw. So here's an original of some washed out buildings. We'd like to adjust the color of each one so they stand out a little better. In the Edit panel, open up the Color Mixer. The very first control asks you what you want to adjust, color or HSL. Select HSL. Under that drop-down menu, there's Hue, Saturation, Luminance, and all tabs. Select Saturation. We want to bring some saturation and richness back into the color of the buildings, so drag the yellow slider to the right to get more yellow. Sometimes it's hard to judge exactly what colors are affecting the image, and this green building is a good example of that. Instead of guessing what colors make up that green, you can simply use the Targeted Adjustment tool, or TAT, which is located next to the Adjustment pull-down. So click on the TAT tool and click and hold on the green building. Move the mouse upward to add saturation, or downward to desaturate it. The TAT tool will only affect the adjustment that you opened in that panel. In this case, we're adjusting saturation. If we had selected hue, the hue would change with the TAT tool. If you think the colors look too dark, then all you have to do is click on the Luminance tab. It controls how bright the colors appear. So click on a dark area of the yellow and drag upward. Now the colors are a little bit brighter. So that's how it works for tweaking saturation and luminance. However, if you actually want to change a color and not just tweak an existing color, then click on the Hue tab. The controls are the same. Click on your Tat tool on the yellow building and drag upward or downward to change the color. So once you're done, just look at the image, admire what you've done, and then go ahead and close it. So removing spots, blemishes, and unwanted things in your image. So if you have spots or simple blemishes on your subject's face, you can fix a lot of this type of stuff right here in Camera Raw using the spot removal tool. It borrows some of the healing power from Photoshop's healing brush. You can even paint strokes with it. It's not nearly as precise as the healing brush in Photoshop itself. So for quick spots and dusts and blemishes, minor details, you can use this tool. But for serious removal, leave it to Camera Raw's big brother, Photoshop, in the healing brush there. So step 1, open image 6 _ remove spots.dng. Right click on it, open in Camera Raw. First thing I'm going to do, because this annoys me just a little bit, is I'm going to fix the clipping in the dark areas by simply going to the basic, and I'm going to shift, double click on blacks, and shift, double click on whites. So here's a portrait we may want to retouch. Our subject has a dark circle under his left eye. We may want to remove some of the blemishes on his skin. So get the spot removal tool by pressing the B key, or from the toolbar on the right hand side of the window. It's the third tool down. It looks like a band-aid. It's right here. So I'm going to go to 100%, and then I'm going to simply move it over so I can see. So this is the spot I want to affect, and I can use the bracket tools next to the P to make it bigger or smaller. And I'm just going to paint that area. So when you finish the stroke, you'll see 2 pins. One's red. That's the area that you are healing, and it's taking the area from the green. So if you look here, this red is healed from the area green. So what it does is it analyzes the spots, tries to find something quite close to the original, and then it copies that image, that texture over. You can manually adjust it by simply grabbing the green pin and moving it somewhere else. And as soon as you let go, it will add that area. You can see obviously that's not a good choice. So if it doesn't look good, just drag it to another spot. It's very customizable, very easy to do. If you don't like it, simply delete it and start it again. Once the eye looks better, go around and remove the blemishes throughout his face. Once you're done, look at the image, admire it, and then let's save it as lesson 5_A. So we'll save it. Save it as a JPEG. Lesson 5_A. Finding spots and specks the easy way. There's nothing worse than printing a large image and seeing all sorts of dust, spots, specks, and goobers on your image. If you shoot landscapes, you'll know it's hard to see these spots in a blue or grayish sky. But when you print them, they stand out like a sore thumb. Camera Raw has a feature that makes it easy to spot all the imperfections and remove them quickly. So open image 7_findspots2.jpg. Notice it's a JPEG, so you have to right click and open in Camera Raw. In this image you can see some spots and specks in the midnight sky. I can see 5 or 6 flaws clearly. But the spots that you can't see are the ones that will cause you a lot of issues. So click on the spot removal tool in the toolbar or simply hit the B key. So here's the spot removal tool. In the panel, there's a check box for visualize spots. Once you check that, you'll see a black version of your photo with spots highlighted in white. You can adjust the sensitivity to visualize the spots. Next, just take the spot removal tool on the right with visualize spots option still on and remove them. Then unclick Visualize Spots, uncheck Overlay, and you'll notice everything's gone. It looks a lot better. So then look at the image, you can admire it, and then close it. So open image 7_findspots1.jpg. Again, it's a JPEG, so right click, open in Camera Raw. And I want you to do all the same to this image. So use a spot removal tool, visualize the spots, and remove them all from this image. Once you're done with that, save it. As lesson 5_B. And we'll turn this image in. So removing haze or fog. The dehaze slider, this tool removes spatial hazing, which is the water droplets and dust particles in the air that refract light, making the photo look hazy or foggy looking. There's another way to fix this, is use a polarizing filter on your camera when you shoot the image. So open image 8_dehaze1.jpg. Notice it's a JPEG, so right click on it, open in Camera Raw. So to remove haze from your photos, open a foggy or hazy image in Camera Raw. Then click on the dehaze slider in the edit panel. So dehaze is right here, and slide it simply to the right, and bam, the problem is solved. Before, after, looks much better. So if you look at this image, you can admire it and then just close it. There's another way to selectively choose the haze you want to remove. Open 8_dehaze2.dng. Notice it's very foggy, but if you remove all the haze from this image, the image's impact is just not the same. It would destroy the photo. So select the adjustment brush, which is the fourth down, or simply hit the K key. In the panel, click the little arrow next to the size. It'll expand and give you more options for the adjustment brush. Then go down to Selective Edits and click the backwards arrow to reset all the sliders back to 0. Also uncheck Auto Mask if it's selected. Next, set the dehaze to +100 and simply paint in the dehaze. I would adjust the feather to be 0. You can adjust the brush size by using the brackets next to the P key. One of the wonderful things you can do with the adjustment brush is you can make an adjustment after you've brushed it into the photo. So now change the dehaze slider to +50. And see how it changes the selection. So look at this image. You could admire it and then simply save it as lesson 5_C. We'll turn this image in. Cropping and straightening. There's a good advantage to cropping your photo in Camera Raw over Photoshop. Although Photoshop has adopted this cropping advantage in the latest version of Photoshop, you can bring back uncropped version of your image later with Camera Raw. So open the image 10_straighten.jpg. And again, it's a JPEG, so right click on it and open in Camera Raw. Simply hit the C key to enable the crop tool. The crop tool is the second tool from the top. To crop, just simply click and drag the area that you want to crop. And then right click and you can crop as shot, reset crop, do a lot of different options there. I'm going to reset it. You can also set an aspect ratio. So if you want it to be, say, 5:7, because you need to make a 5:7, it'll give you that aspect ratio, and then you can adjust where you want to crop that particular part of the image. If you hit escape, it'll go back to the original. So like Photoshop, Camera Raw also has a straighten tool which allows you to trace along a horizon line to straighten that image. So you click on the straightening tool and then you trace the horizon line. And then you just, to finalize a crop, simply double click in the middle. If you don't like that crop, simply go back to the crop tool and you can adjust it or just hit reset crop. You can also just simply drag and crop how you want as well. So once you're done with that, just look at the image, admire it, and then feel free to close it. Dodging, burning, and adjusting individual areas of your photograph. One of my favorite features of Camera Raw is the ability to make non-destructive adjustments to individual areas of your photo. This is called localized corrections. The way they've added this feature is pretty cool. It's different than using a brush in Photoshop. In some aspects of it, I think you'll like even better. So open 11_dodgeburn.dng, and you'll notice the sky is really bright and the ground is really dark. So you have to adjust the sky and the ground itself. So we're going to use the adjustment brush for that. So click on the adjustment brush or hit the K key. So there's a couple things you want to make sure you do. I would first of all make sure that the little arrow is open and you have more options. Make your brush size 10, your feather 75, your flow 50, your density 100. Uncheck auto mask if it's selected. In selective edits, hit the backward arrow to zero out all your sliders and slide your exposure to -4. And then we're going to paint the sky. And be careful not to come real close to the rock or the horizon lines. And then also paint the sky in the water as well. So the coolest part of the adjustment brush is the auto mask. And so we're going to turn on the auto mask. What the auto mask will do is it will automatically find an edge and not paint that adjustment over that edge, as long as you don't hit the black line on the circle. So between the dotted line and the black line in the cursor, make sure that you don't go over that. So if you notice, I'm slowly painting around the edge of the rock. And sometimes you have to do it twice just because of the way the flow is set up. I'd rather do it twice than have one mess up. And as long as you don't hit that black line, it should tone only the area around it. Same with the horizon line here and here. And you don't want that strip of land to get too dark as well. So once you get to this area here and this area over here, simply use the bracket keys next to the P key and make your brush smaller. And if you lose your little circle, simply make your photo bigger. So you can go in and darken that edge. There, that looks pretty good. So now the sky's real dark. So once you get the sky painted, adjust your exposure back to -1. I would add 33 to contrast. 50 to texture. 50 to clarity. 10 to haze, dehaze. And 25 to saturation. So if you look at it here, here's before, here's after. So how do you know if you've painted over an area and you missed a spot? Just make sure your pin is checked in red and click on the mask options and you can see where you've painted it. Or you can hit your Y key. So next, let's work on the rock formation. So first, check the plus on the top. If you don't see it, make sure your adjustment brush is still open. Click the plus, which creates a new adjustment. Reset the selective edits. And let's add +1 to the exposure and make the brush size 7. So turn off the auto mask and then paint the rock and its reflection, staying away from the edge. And go ahead and paint the land as well. Once you get that good, then click on Auto Mask and go really carefully around the edge of the rock. Careful not to hit the sky with the solid circle. And then to do the small formation, just simply zoom in and make the brush smaller with the bracket keys. And don't forget the reflection. So once you finish with the rock, let's change the exposure for that. We'll drag it down a little bit so that it's plus 85. Increase the contrast to 53. We'll open up the shadows area by adding 8. Highlights, we'll add plus 39. And then let's add a little bit of saturation as well. Plus 10. So there are a few other things to know about the adjustment brush. The feather control slider controls how soft the brush edges are. The higher the number, the softer the brush. So you'll need to use a soft brush about 90% of the time. For hard edge brushes, set the slider to 0. The default brush settings are designed to have a build up as you paint. So if you paint over an area that's not dark enough, paint another stroke over top of it. This build up is controlled by flow and the density sliders. The density sliders kind of simulates the way Photoshop airbrush capabilities work with its brush tools. But the effect is so subtle that I don't ever change it from the default setting of 100. The flow slider controls the amount of paint that comes out of the brush. So in this case, I just left it at 50. So once you're satisfied with the image, look at it, admire it. In fact, here is before and here is after. And then let's save it. And we'll call it lesson 5_D. I hope you had a good week and I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Next week we'll talk more about Camera Raw.